What's up YouTube, Saf here on SuperSaf TV, and in this video we're going to be looking at the key differences between the LG G7 ThinQ and the Samsung Galaxy S9 Plus. So we've got the flagships from Samsung and LG this year. Last year Samsung really did overshadow LG. Will they do that again this year? Well, let's find out. Now, starting off with the build and design, both devices are quite premium. However, they're not too much different compared to last year. The Samsung Galaxy S9 Plus looks a lot like the Samsung Galaxy S8 Plus, and the LG G7 looks a lot like the LG V30 that we had last year. Both devices have a metal frame with glass panels. On the G7, you do have a bit of a curved back. With the S9 Plus, you've got curved panels both on the front and back. The panels are also symmetrical, which in my opinion make the S9 Plus look very unique. Now, generally speaking, I think both have a great build and design overall, and I don't think you're going to be disappointed with either. Both are also IP68 water and dust resistant. Now, when it comes to the size difference, the G7 is quite a bit smaller compared to the S9 Plus in terms of the height, the width, as well as the thickness. It also weighs quite a bit less compared to the S9 Plus, 27 grams. So generally speaking, the G7 is the more compact device. It does, however, have a slightly smaller display, 6.1 inches versus 6.2 inches on the S9 Plus. And both devices have a narrow aspect ratio, but the S9 Plus does have a slightly better screen to body ratio. And that is because the G7 has a notch. Now, this is something we're seeing so much more of these days. You can switch this off with software, however, and there are a few different options, so you can have some colored backgrounds as well for that notch. Something that I'm not too keen about. Now, this is going to come down to your personal preference. I know a lot of people passionately hate that notch, and if that is the case, then the S9 Plus might be the better option for you. Now, we do have minimal bezels overall on both devices, which is great, and we have different technologies for the displays as well. The S9 Plus has Super AMOLED, and the G7 has LCD. Now, generally speaking, I always favor AMOLED over LCD. I just prefer the colors, the blacks are deeper, but LG have improved this LCD display compared to previous years, and you do have a super bright display which is comparable to that of the S9 Plus. Now, when I was looking at both devices side by side, both did look very bright. I'm not sure which one is brighter overall. This I'd have to spend some more time with both devices to see. Now, in terms of the resolution, you've got slightly more pixels on the G7, and that is because of that notch. And the G7 also has a slightly better pixel density. This is something that I really don't think you're going to notice on day-to-day usage. And we have the Qualcomm Snapdragon 845 processor powering both devices. The S9 Plus does come with an Exynos 9010 variant. Now, this is going to vary depending on your region. And the S9 Plus also comes with 6 GB of RAM. The G7 comes with a base of 4 GB, but there will be a 6 GB version available. I'm not sure which markets that will be for. Now, because of the similar internals, I expect similar performance overall. But of course, we're going to be doing some SuperSaf style speed tests here as soon as we have the G7 retail unit in hand. And if you want to see those first, then make sure you have subscribed and switch on notifications. Now, for storage, the S9 Plus has a base of 64 GB, but there are 128 GB as well as 256 GB versions available. With the G7, it's going to start at 64 GB as well. And there is also going to be a 128 GB version available to certain markets. But with both devices, you do have a micro SD card slot, so you can expand that storage, which is absolutely awesome to have. Now, let's move on to the cameras. With the S9 Plus, you've got dual 12 megapixel cameras, both optically stabilized. The primary camera is a regular angle and it has a dual aperture. This is one of the first smartphones with a dual aperture, f1.5 and f2.4. And it switches between these two depending on the light in your environment. And there's also a telephoto camera, which is going to give you 2x optical zoom, and this has an f2.4 aperture. Now, I've been using the S9 Plus's camera quite a bit over the past few weeks, and it does perform very well. You can see lots of samples in my camera comparisons that I've done. I'll try to link a few in the cards. With the LG G7, it also has a dual camera setup, both 16 megapixels. The primary camera has a regular angle of view, and that has an f1.6 aperture. And the secondary camera is a super wide angle camera, and that has an f1.9 aperture. Now, this is something that's kind of unique to LG, having that wide angle camera. And it's something that I actually prefer compared to a telephoto camera. Obviously, this is going to come down to your personal preference. Now, LG haven't confirmed if either of these cameras are optically stabilized or not, but of course, we're going to be doing some SuperSaf style camera comparisons between these two devices as soon as the retail version of the G7 is out. Now, we do have a portrait mode on both devices, and this is where it's going to artificially blur the background. It's called live focus. on the S9 Plus. On the G7, it's just called portrait mode. And what's great is that on both devices, you can adjust the blur after the fact. This is something that you can't do on all devices, so it's nice that both of these do have that. And the G7 also has AI cam, so this is basically where the camera is going to try to detect the scene and try to enhance your images accordingly. Kind of similar to what we saw on the Huawei P20 Pro. It's something that I can't really see myself using, but it might be something that you're into. Apparently this is going to learn and get better with time as well. And for video, the S9 Plus does have 4K at up to 60 frames a second. It's also got super slow-mo, so that's 720p up to 960 frames a second. Now this is just a small burst, so you do have to press it at the right time, or you can use the automatic motion detection where it's going to allow you to place a square in your scene, and then it's going to look out for motion in that square. As soon as it notices it, it's going to give that burst of slow motion, and you can get some really cool results. Now with the G7, LG have not yet confirmed the frame rates. I would assume 4K at 30 frames a second at least, and possibly 60 frames a second as well, because the Qualcomm Snapdragon 845 does support this, but there has been no mention of slow motion, so we're not too sure about that as yet. For the front-facing cameras, the S9 Plus has an 8-megapixel front-facing camera with an f1.7 aperture as well as autofocus. The G7 also has an 8-megapixel camera, but it has an f1.7 aperture. Now both devices also have a portrait mode from the front-facing camera where it's going to artificially blur the background once again. But with the S9 Plus, it only takes one shot and that's it. So if it doesn't work too well, that's what you're stuck with. With the G7, you can adjust the blur after the fact as well, like you can do with the rear-facing cameras. This is quite cool because it's something that I've not seen on a front-facing camera before, and I really can't wait to test this out more. Now for software, you've got Android Oreo version 8 on both devices. They do come with their skin, so you've got Samsung skin on the S9 Plus and you've got LG skin on the LG G7. Now both do come with their advantages and disadvantages. It's going to come down to your personal preference, which one you like. And moving on to the audio department, this is where things get quite interesting. First things first, good news, both devices do have a 3.5mm headphone jack. This is something that's kind of becoming extinct on smartphones these days. The G7, however, does have a 32-bit Hi-Fi Quad DAC. This is something that we're used to seeing on the V series, but LG are now bringing it over on to the G series as well. The S9 Plus has stereo speakers tuned by AKG, and we've also got Dolby Atmos surround sound. With the G7, we've got a single bottom firing speaker. However, this is a boombox speaker. Now, the way this works is it actually uses the inner space in the device as a resonance chamber to really amplify the bass. Now, having a quick listen to this, it does get very, very loud, especially if you have it on a hard surface, because the sound is going to vibrate off that surface too. And on the G7, you've also got DTS:X 3D surround sound. Now, I'm no audiophile, but both of these do sound pretty good to me. You've got their advantages and disadvantages. With the G7, although it does have that amazing bass, because it's still a downfiring, you can still cover it up. With the S9 Plus, although the bass isn't going to be as powerful or as loud, you've got stereo speakers, so it is going to come down to your personal preference. Now, looking at the biometrics, both of these have a fingerprint scanner at the back of the device underneath the cameras. In my testing, both work absolutely great and are super fast. You've also got facial recognition on both devices, but the S9 Plus does also come with an iris scanner, and that's going to give you intelligent scan as well, which uses a combination of facial recognition as well as the iris scanner. So you do have a few additional options here on the S9 Plus. Now, we do have an additional button on both devices on the left hand side. With the S9 Plus, it is the Bixby Button, and this is going to launch Samsung's very own AI assistant. I know there's mixed feelings about this. With the G7, you have a dedicated button as well, but this is going to launch Google Assistant. So LG have been working closely with Google, so they've not gone ahead and made their own. They've got Google Assistant, which I know a lot of you guys prefer. And with this button, pressing it once is going to launch Google Assistant. Pressing it twice is going to launch Google Lens. Pressing and holding it is going to allow Google walkie-talkie commands without having to say, okay, Google. We've also got a similar setup here with the Bixby button. By pressing and holding it, you can get the Bixby commands without having to say, hey, Bixby, each time. Now, of course, it's going to come down to your personal preference. If you do like Google Assistant, then this might be a useful addition. But if you don't mind Bixby, then this might be quite useful for you as well. With Bixby, you can complete actions deep within apps. This is something that you can't do with Google Assistant. But of course, Bixby is not as knowledgeable as Google is. One thing both of these have in common is that you cannot remap the buttons. You can switch them off, but you can't remap them. It'd be nice if you could remap both of these for something that's custom to you, but it looks like the manufacturers want to push you to use the assistance on the phones. Now moving on to the batteries, the S9 Plus has a larger 3500 mAh battery compared to the G7's 3000 mAh battery. Now usage is obviously going to vary. With the S9 Plus, I'm getting okay battery life, around 4 to 5 hours of on-screen time in a day. I'm not so sure how good the G7 battery will be, especially considering the smaller size. Of course, we're going to do some battery tests and see how well the G7 actually performs in day-to-day usage. The good thing is that both devices do have fast charging. You've also got wireless charging on both devices, but the S9 Plus does support fast wireless charging too. Now, in terms of pricing and availability, the S9 Plus, of course, is already available. And you're looking at around $840 in the US if you want to buy it offline. This is for the 64GB version, and in the UK, it actually starts at 128GB at £870. With the G7, LG have not released any pricing information as yet. Availability should be towards the end of May. However, I would expect the price of the G7 to be lower compared to the S9 Plus to make it more competitive. This is something that LG does tend to do. So there we have it, guys. Those are the key differences between the Samsung Galaxy S9 Plus and the LG G7 ThinQ. Both promising devices, and I think what's common about both of these devices is that they try to tick as many boxes as possible. We've got expandable storage, we've got 3.5mm headphone jacks on both devices. These are things that we're seeing so less of these days. Which do you prefer overall, the LG G7 ThinQ or the Samsung Galaxy S9 Plus? Definitely drop me a comment below and let me know your thoughts. I hope you enjoyed this video and found it useful. If you did, then please do hit that thumbs up button for me. It really does help me out. And if you're new to the channel, then be sure to subscribe and switch on notifications. There's lots more content coming up on here. Thanks for watching. This is Saf on SuperSaf TV. I'll see you next time.